Hello and welcome to Sanctuary Columbus's Table Talk. Our Table Talk right now, today we are discussing mental health, and I am so pleased to have members of our own congregation here with me today to have this very important conversation. I'm not sure what angle you're watching it here or who appears next to who. Actually, I do know because it's recorded, so I can say right here next to me. I shouldn't point. That's inappropriate. Bad. Don't point. So right next to me is Joanna Malachowski, and Joanna is a trauma competent care coach. Right underneath Joanna is Micah Morgan, who is a licensed professional counselor. And right next to Micah and directly underneath me is Michelle Gabor, who is a social worker and family counselor. Hello, ladies. How are you?
Wonderful. Glad to be here.
Glad to be here. Good. Well, under normal circumstances, we would be having this conversation in person, but we're not under normal circumstances. And we are using this technology that is available to us. And honestly, this allows us to share this content even more broadly than if we were just live. So this is a very important conversation. One that we could have had a long time ago, but I'm grateful that we're having it now. The question is why, though? Why this subject and why now? Well, the conversation about mental illness and mental health is becoming more prevalent in our society. And that is a good thing for us to have greater, stronger, more honest conversation about this. The National Alliance on Mental Health reports that approximately 1 in 5 adults in the United States, that's 46.6 million individuals, experience mental illness in a given year. Somebody say, wow. Mental illness, while not easily defined, can range from a plethora of different hindrances and disorders that make normal everyday life a challenge or borderline impossible for individuals. We're talking about this now in the church or from a biblical perspective because it's something that honestly isn't talked about enough. Now, while we're having this conversation, and I have to say this, not just as Pastor Rich, but because of the professionals that we have here on the call and the talk today, the views presented in this video are our own, and they do not represent the opinions or policies of any organization or the agencies with whom these ladies work or are affiliated with. We want the church and we want individuals even outside of the church to know it's important for us to have this conversation, and we wanted to have it right now. So that leads us to my opening question for us today. How have you experienced
disorder, OCD, schizophrenia, and many more? And I think that I've seen God interact in that in many different ways. So I've learned a lot about God's walking through us with suffering. I think mental illness can last days, months, years. And so for God to be walking through that with me has really deepened my understanding of that longing for heaven and something better, and also God's closeness to us during hard times. I've waited for answers from God and wondered what answer he was providing. And I've also seen miraculous healing and a message from God that no one is like broken beyond repair. So that's been my experience.
Thank you for sharing that. Micah?
Yeah, so I have some mental health challenges in my own past. I struggled with surviving sexual abuse. I've got some depression and some anxiety that I've been overcoming. And I've also, for as long as I can remember, I've just been very sensitive to the changes in other people's mental health functioning in my life. I can remember being in high school and middle school and seeing very close friends dealing with self-harm thoughts or depression and anxiety. And I remember being just very aware and sensitive to that and caring deeply about ways that I could support them. So those are some of the things that motivated me to get into this work in the first place. The way I've seen God interact with me and with other people as they've overcome their own mental health challenges, the word that comes to mind is just gracious. I think growing up, I was accidentally put under the impression that people who struggle with mental health are by default more distant from God. And I've found that to be so untrue. And I have seen the way that God continually pursues and draws close to people as they overcome mental health challenges. And it's really a privilege and an honor to be able to walk alongside of God in that work, and to come alongside people as they heal. And it's just a beautiful thing. It's a complex thing. But I love the way that God is he's just a loving father. He's a loving, just caretaker for us as we overcome these things. So those are some thoughts that come to mind for me for this question.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Micah. Joanna?
Yeah. So I also have struggled through some different mental health challenges myself, and members of my family. Most recently, a couple of years ago, when I was dealing with a lot of burnout in my job, I got to a point where I was feeling super anxious every day at work, and having a really hard time kind of getting through the day. And so at that point, I did go to see a therapist for quite a while, and it was really helpful in identifying that, like, even though I wasn't necessarily like having some of those more severe or acute symptoms, that like my mental health was struggling to a point where it was making it harder for me to do my job well, to be a loving partner to my husband, to care well for my children. And at that point, I needed support to get my mental health back to a place where I could be better at the things that were important to me, and be more present for the people that I care about. And so I have found counseling in particular to be a tool that is really helpful in kind of just maintaining my own capacity to care well for myself and my family, and to do my work well. And I think a lot of us who are in positions in our jobs where we have to give a lot, we get to a point where we need some help kind of managing all of that output and getting ourselves filled back up. And so, I think about that now in my work. We really focus on the brain science of trauma. And one of the things we talk a lot about is the experiences that people have in childhood. And a lot of the studies that have been done show that roughly 2/3 of all adults have experienced something in their childhood that we would quantify as a traumatic experience. Mm-hmm. And so most of us have, at least somewhere in our development, something that has disrupted our healthy progression towards adulthood. And so that's not something to be a source of shame. It's a reality, and something that our community needs to wrap around and figure out how to support well, so that we can find healing, and become the best adults that we can be. And so I'm excited that more of these conversations are happening in church, because this is a space where we can really seek that healing together. And we can, be the body of Christ to one another, because it's really in the context of those caring, supportive relationships, either with professionals or with family members or teachers, other adults, that we actually can start to heal those things. So that's why I think this work is so important, and the context of it happening in church is really powerful as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you all for those responses. For me personally, I have family members who have some of those acute, severe mental health challenges. And so personally, I want to know how to be a better support, as a family member to those who are dealing with those more severe and acute, issues. And as a pastor as well, I want to do better about equipping our congregation to for those who are in need. They know the places where to go to get those resources, but also for the person who is in relationship with those who are experiencing those mental health issues, so that there is not this stigmatism that is placed on that individual where we could say or do some really harmful things, which is, in the church world, unfortunately, there is that history of saying and doing some harmful things for those who have experienced mental health challenges. So why do you think this is so difficult for the church to just have this conversation? What's our challenge here? Why is it so hard for us? Anybody who can jump in on that.
Well, I wonder if a lot of people worry that if they accept that mental health challenges are real, that they may give God a bad reputation. I worry if people have a fear that they will tarnish the reputation of God's sovereignty and his ability to heal if they accept that there are ways that our brains and our bodies can really change in terms of how they function, given how our environment affects us. And so one of the things that's helpful for me is keeping that in mind, that a lot of times that is the motivation for people who are reluctant to accept mental health. It's this strong desire to offer reverence to God and honor to God that I think a lot of people, they don't realize that that's what's motivating their behavior or that stigma, but I think it is. And so what's been helpful for me is kind of broadening my personal theology to understand that the way that sin has affected the world, it's affected all of creation. I wonder if we may kind of limit the picture or narrow the picture of sin to just humanity and the way that humans behave, but that's just not the case. The picture is a little bit wider and broader than that. And so we understand that God is still in the redemptive work, in the business of restoring creation. We are in between what he's already done and what he is still yet to do. And so a part of that means that our bodies and our minds, they struggle sometimes. And this is a beautiful thing that God has allowed, for science and for us to get training to come alongside of people in the work by providing mental health services and, the healing that doctors provide and other professionals. And so those are some things that come to mind when I think about, where does this stigma come from or this reluctance to accept that mental health challenges are real.
Right. Anybody else want to respond to that? Why do you think this is so hard to talk about in the church? Michelle?
Yeah, I have two things that come to mind. One is, I think, like many other topics we've covered on Table Talks, there's harmful stereotypes out there. So people will throw around terms like the weather's being really schizophrenic or something like that. And it makes people feel embarrassed that that label would apply to them, and that when they say that label, what are people thinking? Are they thinking crazy like the weather? And that's one thing that comes to mind. And the second, I think, relates to what Micah was saying, in that I think we all know what we know and we don't know what we don't. And so if we think that mental illness is always a spiritual battle, it may just increase a lot of shame. Why am I not close enough to God? And so I think some more education on the fact that mental challenges can be caused by chemical things, physiological things, just like diabetes. It can be caused by traumas that we're all going through. We can be thinking, everyone's doing great in this pandemic except me. So
Yeah.
understanding
Wow.
that we all are affected by world traumas, and then our own personal experiences could just help take away some of that taboo.
That's good. Joanna,
Yeah,
you want to respond to that?
yeah, I think that a big part of it is that the science is still not widely known and understood, and so this is something I thought a lot about in education because that's the world that I've spent my career in, and I wasn't trained when I was becoming a teacher in like the impact of trauma on kids' brains and the fact that when they come into my classroom, they don't all come ready to learn in the same way because of all the things that they're bringing. So you intuit some of that as a teacher, but there's actually lots of science that can demystify a lot of what's happening with kids and with adults all the time. And unfortunately, that knowledge is just not widely known. And so people don't understand. It feels mysterious. It feels scary. Like, what's happening? I don't get it. And really, there are a lot of scientific ways to understand what's happening that I think when we can pull back the veil and just like make it less unknown, then people can tackle it in a way that is thoughtful and makes sense given everything else they have going on in their life, and just like handle it just like, just because people are in church, we don't tell them not to go to the doctor if they're not feeling good. It's the same kind of thing. There's a lot that we can do to help our brains function in the best way that they can. And being part of a church, we can encourage people to seek out that support to take care of their brains, just like we encourage one another to take care of our bodies in the same way.
Yeah. Yeah, I think, some of this, it leads to not understanding, like the Bible was written a very, very long time ago when they didn't have language even for the things that we're experiencing today. So you can't just read the Bible and be like, well, it doesn't say it in the Bible, so it doesn't apply, to today. Come on, we've evolved a little bit more than the time in which the Bible was written, but also in the way in which we read the Bible. So you study Elijah, after he, he defeats all of those, pagan, worshipers. And then Jezebel says, I'm coming to get you. Like, I'm coming to get I'm taking you out. And he leaves and he goes off to a dry place, a 40-day journey, tells his servant, get away from me, go somewhere else. He's going to die. He's dealing with the deepest kind of depression, I think, well, maybe not the deepest, but a very deep depression where he is ready to die. But not just Elijah. Right? David curses the day he was born. Like, he's going through some hardship. Or even when you read Philippians, Paul says, hey, look, I would much rather be with God. I'm ready to get out of here. But, for your sake, I'm sticking around. Like, those are mental health challenges that I see in the scripture. Perhaps it's because of my own kind of going through some of those times of, depression, or feeling like, man, it would be so much better to just leave here, to get out of here, get out of this world, get out of this craziness, than to try to work my way through it. So thank you for those very honest responses about why this is such a difficult or challenging subject for the church, or taboo. But we're here to change that, right? So thank you. Why would or how would you describe what is happening to us physiologically? You've kind of alluded to some brain things and so forth, but particularly right now, how would you describe what is happening to us physiologically as we're in this global pandemic right now?
Yeah, I think one way to describe it is most of us, I don't want to speak for all people, but I think many of us are in high alert mode, since February and March. And I think it's important to remember that a long time, right? And so this is chronic stress that we're describing for millions of people to be in a state of high alert. And so I think what's helpful to remember is that the brain is structured to be efficient. And so there are parts of the brain that handle different things. The part that's closest to the base of our skull, our neck, those are those automatic responses and behaviors. That's the section of the brain that controls those things. So our emotions, the way that we respond to danger, all of those things are very close to the base of the brain. And then as we get further away from the base of the brain to the outside of the brain, we're looking at the section of the brain that handles the higher reasoning, creativity, planning, making decisions. And so if you're spending months at a time in high alert where you're nervous about, for example, going out to the grocery store and potentially contracting the coronavirus, or you are stressed out about family members or friends who have been adversely affected significantly by the pandemic, those kinds of thoughts and states of mind keep you toward the base of your brain, where you are in high alert and in survival mode. And so for me, when I'm coming alongside of clients and just kind of helping them understand what's going on physiologically, I think it's helpful to kind of paint that picture that you've been preparing for danger every day that you've woken up for the last several months. And that's not an optimal way for us to function. We want to stay in, the higher part of our brain, and even the middle part, right, where our emotions are, and let the base of our brain handle things like the heart rate and whatnot. But we haven't really been able to do that for a long time now.
Is that base part, is that reptilian part of our brain? Is that?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's that, like, where
Yes,
that fight or flight, kind of comes in. I'm even clenching my fists as I say that. It's like we're always
just thinking about it. Yeah.
Just thinking about it. Yeah, it's like we're always ready for a fight or, to defend ourselves, and we're kind of just all in that moment. Wow.
And when we stay in that heightened stress response for a long period of time, our brain starts to create new templates for how we respond to stress. So if you're already in that heightened state, whatever your default is, some of us are the fighters, right? And so you might find yourself like, it just takes that little thing right now to set you off. And you're like, man, why am I even reacting like this? It was not that big of a deal. But your stress response already elevated just that one little thing. Others of us are more dissociators. So we might be like sleeping a lot, or that, I don't know if any of you are like doom scrollers. You're just like scrolling on the phone and you're like, why? I've been sitting here for an hour. What is this? Right? That's that. It's actually your brain is seeking regulation. The stress response is so high already. And so figuring out how to find healthier patterns to regulate our brain, because our brains are in that heightened stress response state and they're seeking that regulation either from intensity or from being able to just kind of shut off.
Wow. Yeah. As you just said that, I'm like, I don't scroll a lot, but I do have this like escapism. I know this, like, if I'm under stress, I'm like, okay, I just need to escape. What can I escape to? What's available? What's either quickly at my hands or in this room, or, maybe it's people that I'm trying to get away from. So I need to get out of this room and I just need to escape. Yeah. Wow. So Michelle, do you want to add anything to that? No,
I think you did a great job.
Yeah. Very good. So our brains, this you're saying this brain that we have, this God-given gift, this is part of who we are, can be deeply affected by what's happening outside of us.
Absolutely.
Right? And so the brain is like a filter. It's filtering all that, what's happening outside of us. But you also alluded to some things like in the past, maybe even things from our childhood that we could be holding on to, perhaps because, like Joanna, you said, it forms these new pathways or maybe ridges. I know I've talked about this before. It's like a groove that just gets deeper and deeper and deeper. So it basically makes an easy track. And the brain just follows that track. And it just gets right into that groove and says, this is how you're going, to respond to the circumstances around you. Is that right?
Yeah. And it may not even be that like oh, this thing happened to me and I can't let go of it. It might not be like, oh, I'm holding on to this thing. It can be something that has just impacted the way that our brain has developed from that point forward. Because the way that our brain makes connections is that the same thing has to happen with enough repetition over and over again to make a neural connection. And as we experience things repeatedly, that's what forms those templates and those default responses. And it's really tricky to kind of undo those things. It's not as simple as like, oh, I see that happened and now I'm going to let it go. Like rewiring your brain is hard work, and to reroute things, it takes lots of repetition and lots of experience of making a new template. So it's, something I've been thinking about a lot in the pandemic, because the patterns that we have kind of create new patterns too. So we need to be thoughtful about, especially when I think about my children, like what kinds of routines do we have and what templates are being set in their brains while they're growing up in this time where there's a lot of uncertainty and a lot of unpredictability.
Right. So there's in this time of like COVID-19, man, we've been in here, as you said, since late February, early March. I mean, it was March 15th was our last, we didn't have service that Sunday. So we haven't been in corporate gatherings since then. And then you add on top of that, this racial uprising, which is traumatizing for a lot of folks. I know for myself personally, as African-American male, it's just re-traumatizing over and over again. And so that's stressful. And now we're about to enter into, well, we're already in this electoral season where in just about a month from now, we're going to be electing the next president. And that's quite tenuous, let alone like the handling work. Is all of this is it too, some people will say that's not trauma. You're just throwing that word out there and you're using it too flippantly, is it safe to call all of that traumatizing?
That's a good question.
Go ahead, Micah.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think at minimum, we can definitely call it chronic stress. And some people use the term toxic stress. But it's describing this long-term state of being under distress and in high alert. And that really does affect our bodies and our brains. And a lot of us are reluctant to accept that. I hear a lot of talk about allowing the past to be the past, for example. But the reality is our brains we're not as conscious of what our brains are doing as we think. We would like to think that we think every thought intentionally and that we do every behavior intentionally. But the reality is your brain it's created to work efficiently. It's created to work.
Wow. So she froze
develop time so that you don't have to. Am I frozen?
No, we got you now.
Am I back?
The last thing I caught was
good.
that our made to function. Did she say elasticity?
Efficiently.
Efficiently. Yeah. So I think it's good to remember that, and maybe that's a bit liberating too. So that instead of maybe feeling shame and guilt about how we're showing up when we're in this toxic stress situation, then we can kind of shift to thinking about, okay, how can I raise to consciousness and intentionality the scripts and the repetition and patterns that my brain has developed over the last, several months? How can I raise that to intentionality and partner with someone to change that, rather than just penalizing myself for showing up the way that I have, knowing that my brain is running on autopilot.
Another thing to remember is that the behaviors that our brain uses are adaptive in some way. Like we do things that serve a purpose. So they might not be the most healthy thing, but it's serving some sort of purpose for our brain and for our overall regulation. And so it's not always helpful to just kind of beat ourselves up for doing the thing that we wish we weren't doing, but rather to understand, like, what is the function of this in my life right now? And then is there something healthy I can replace it with? Or is it okay right now because this is what I need to be okay right now? One of the ones that I always appreciate is that when you're really dysregulated, your brain actually craves salty, crunchy, fatty, sweet foods. So that like feeling that when you're stressed, you want to eat a donut, like that's actually your brain. It's a form of regulation for your brain. It's a natural thing. So you don't have to beat yourself up for that desire, but then knowing it, thinking about like, either when do I want to do that? When is that really the regulation I need? Or what other healthy patterns can I put in place to help mitigate or meet that need for regulation in a different way?
That's good. Michelle?
And I think that we all have developed things that make us feel better. Yeah, like Joanna's saying, a certain food or exercise or something. I think it's overly optimistic for us to say that we're going to go through this pandemic and just use that and just get through it. Especially because a lot of those coping skills that we've learned into our adult lives are taken away from us during the pandemic. So for all of us, this is the first pandemic we've ever been through. And a lot of the advice that I routinely give out as counselor, I'm actually not able to give out right now. So normally I say control what you can control and delegate what is outside of your control. But people are being asked to fulfill multiple roles right now, to be the teacher for maybe not just one child, but multiple children, where you would never have like one teacher in a school be teaching like 3 grades at one time. Right. Plus be your, a spouse or a partner, plus be an employee, plus be a daughter, plus be, whatever. So it's unrealistic. And then another piece of advice I give out is call someone for help. And the health advice for the pandemic has really been stay socially distant, stay isolated, protect your loved ones. And so people are not able to ask for the help that they normally would or could. And so, I definitely don't think it's like an overstatement to say that we're experiencing some trauma right now.
Yeah, so heavy. Man, I'm just thinking about just so many people right now going through a lot of those things that you mentioned. And it's not just one thing, like you said, there's multiple things that we could write down that we're going through and are being asked to do beyond our control, and beyond our ability to delegate it to somebody else who's also going through, that very same thing that we are going through. The word is like, is unpredictability, right? We did not, I don't know anybody who predicted 2020 would go the way it is going right now. In fact, everybody was like, all the preachers in 2019 was like, 2020 vision, I can see it. Let's go get it. Let's go claim it. In January, they were humming like, here's what we're going to do. Here's the money we're going to raise. Here's the people we're going to save. And in February came around like, yep, it's doing great. And then March is like, all right, well, by Easter, we're going to get this back on track. Summertime, we're going to be ready to go. I mean, like, you cannot, preachers, you can't predict this. Nobody else is predicting it. Prophets, quiet down for a little bit, All right. Unpredictability is the word. And our brains are receiving this unpredictability. What you're kind of alluding to earlier is that our brain makes these tracks so that we can better predict the things that are going to happen and how to handle those things. But we are in a truly unpredictable season of life. Can you tell us some more about how our brains function when we feel that threat of unpredictability?
Yeah, so something that's really interesting is that our brain doesn't know the difference between when we are in like physical danger and when we're just experiencing something that feels unsafe to us, maybe psychologically, or feels stressful. So if you're being chased by a bear in the woods, or the governor is telling you have to stay home for 3 weeks. You don't know your brain doesn't know the difference at that lower level that we were talking about before. And you used the word, I think, filter, Pastor, and like that's how our brains work, is all the information comes in through that brainstem and is filtered up to the top. And so your cortex might know the difference, but your brainstem doesn't, and the information comes in there first and activates the stress response either way. And so that's why, even though you would be like, I know in my head it's not that bad, I just have to stay home with my family, it's not that bad, right? But your stress response is still activated by that unpredictability, that sense that I'm not safe. And when we don't have access to our cortex as well, we can't do that long-term thinking and planning that we are normally able to do. That only happens when we're in that kind of state of calm in our brain. And I don't know about the rest of you, but it's very hard for me to access a state of calm right now, anytime. And so we might normally be the type of people who like to lay out a 3-month plan and know what's coming and, make thoughtful choices. And right now we find ourselves just having to react all the time.
Yeah.
It doesn't feel good. It feels really like out of control to us. And that can kind of compound the stress that we're already feeling. Or you can get frustrated. This has happened to me a lot, because you do a bunch of research and you make a plan. And then as the plan gets closer and closer, you realize, oh, that's not going to work out. And then that disappointment, that frustration of like, here we are again, another thing that's not working out. That has been something that has taken a toll on me for sure, and taken a toll on our family, and can kind of send me into a tailspin of disappointment when I'm like, why do I even bother planning things? It's never going to work out anyway. So that's one of the challenges that I think we're definitely facing.
Yeah, that's good. So it affects our ability to just plan. That's good. I like that thought of just, the information doesn't come this way. It comes this way. Oh, that's very helpful. Thank you. Michelle?
Yeah. So the same process of it going up instead of down affects our relationships. Because we have the feeling first. And so we're already feeling annoyed, and then the child spills the milk, and normally you'd be like, no big deal, like it happens. But you're not in this part of your brain. So you're just like super annoyed by it, and overreacting. And I think, like Joanna alluded to, you might look back on it and be like, oh man, I really overreacted. And then experience more mental health feelings of shame, like, oh, I'm like a bad mom or something like that. But in the moment, we're not in control of it when we're going through a trauma or a stress. And so I think that we're going to go later into some things we can do to help regulate ourselves. But it's just important to remember that our relationships are strained, and it's no one's fault. It's not your fault. It's not their fault. It's just partly strained because of what we're all going through.
That's good. Micah, you got any thoughts here?
Yeah. Continuing on with that thought, from thinking about how our ability to plan is affected, how our ability to relate is affected. There are a lot of people who are creatives by trade or just by it's what you love to do. And I just kind of want to speak to those people that because of the way your brain is processing this chronically stressful experience, it's going to be a little bit more difficult for you to be creative. You're in a heightened state of stress, of being on high alert. And so, as we've talked about already, the top part of your brain is just more difficult to access. You're going to have to do a little bit more work to calm yourself, to regulate yourself before you're able to do the abstract thinking that you need to do in order to be creative. And so I just wanted to take a moment to speak to those people because my husband is actually a creative, and I've seen the way that the stress has affected him. And it can be really difficult and discouraging to see skills that used to come so fluidly for you, before March and February, begin to feel foreign. And
Yeah.
because we don't really talk a lot about what's happening in our brains and in our bodies as a result of the pandemic, you may be blaming yourself. And so I just want to encourage you that, you know, your brain and your body, they're just trying to survive. We're all just trying to survive. And
Right.
it's difficult to be creative when you're in survival mode.
Wow. Yeah, that, you know, someone, I can't remember who, Michelle, it might have been something you said that triggered this thought about how social media is affecting our mental health state right now because of, I mean, the volatile nature in which conversations are happening on social media, the person that's being presented as having it all together, killing it, you know, even during, you know, the coronavirus time. They've transformed their home into a workspace. They've transformed their home into a exercise, you know, gymnasium. They've transformed their home into a food cooking network, you know, and restaurant. It's like, I'm just doing all the best. And so other people are seeing that. And I was like, oh, well, I'm really not. Do you guys have any thoughts about just how social media is also affecting the current mental health state and ability to cope, survive? I don't want to say thrive, you know, but any thoughts on that social media aspect?
Well, my first thought is to just be gracious with yourself, listeners and watchers. If you see yourself begin to crave social media more than you did, you know, before the pandemic, it's your brain desiring pleasure, and it's your brain desiring an escape. And so when we get interaction from other people on our, you know, Twitter, Snapchat, Facebook, Instagram, we've been programmed to experience pleasure and a sense of approval and affirmation from that, and we begin to crave that. And as we're all aware, because we're more isolated from people during this pandemic, you're going to start probably unconsciously craving that affirmation and social interaction, that pleasure response from getting those likes and those comments through social media, since you're not able to get it as much in person. So I just want to kind of begin with that, because I've heard of some people kind of feeling guilty and being a bit embarrassed by how much they crave social media. And I think it's important to talk about, you know, why is that happening?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Thank you for that response. Anybody else want to chime in on the social media aspect? Joanna?
Yeah, I think you just have to keep an eye on, you know, what the limits are and what the boundaries are for yourself and for your family in terms of what works well for you. And whether or not it's giving you something that is healthy and encouraging you to be the version of yourself that you want to be, or if it's something that is bringing out a negative side of you, or something that is not the part of yourself that you want to kind of come to the forward. And I've seen people respond to it in different ways. You know, I'm a person who needs a lot of social interaction, and I don't get a lot of it right now. And so for me, there's something about that is giving me a little bit of what I'm missing in a way that is not entirely unhealthy, you know. And then for other people, I've seen that the stress of having to consume news that way, because of how that impacts them, they're like, I have to get off Facebook completely because I just can't take in that much news all the time and handle all of that. So it's just something to keep an eye on for yourself. And it's not going to be the same answer for every person of what is healthy and what is good for them.
Yeah, that's good. Thank you. So, you know, there's a range of mental health stability that we are becoming more aware of, right? And I think what comes to mind is, how do we help people, or maybe give people some markers or ways that they can identify that they are under stress, under chronic stress, under acute stress? Like, what could they look for what are the signs? How do I know that I'm really under stress? Because I could really hear some folks saying, well, I don't have that problem. I don't have that problem. So therefore I am not under stress. How do we help people identify that?
Yeah, I think I like the way you phrase that in terms of like, what are some markers? What are some ways we can identify changes in our mental health? I think there are several ways that our body responds to our environment that if we keep an eye on them, we can get some clues that there's something going on that needs some intentional attention. So think about changes in sleep. Do you find yourself craving more sleep than usual, or is your sleep more disrupted than usual? What about concentration? Are you finding yourself experiencing more difficulty to focus on one task for an extended period of time? Your short-term memory, are you forgetting things more often? How irritable are you? Do you find yourself kind of snapping at people about things that several months ago wouldn't have even bothered you? Or are you kind of bickering with people that you live with more often than you used to? I also think paying attention to your heart rate. Like if you do have a moment to sit down, which a lot of us don't have as many of those moments, but when you do, just kind of pay attention to your heart. Is it beating a little bit quicker than last time you checked? Those are all kind of indicators that let us know that our body is under stress. And so it may not mean that you're in an acute state of clinically significant mental health challenge, but it just kind of lets you know, like, okay, there's something going on here. My stress level has increased. My body is trying to tell me that it needs some intentionality in terms of pulling back and helping myself reach a state of calm or just regulation.
Yeah, that's good. Anybody else have some other markers, ways in which we can identify? Michelle?
Yeah, I think when we are in survival mode, we're taking care of all the stuff that needs to get done. And that can be really positive for a short period of time. But if we start to say, well, I just don't really have needs, like I'm good, I'm taking care of other people, that could be an indicator that we're maybe just shoving those needs under the surface. And a way to check for that, I always ask people to think about when you were like in high school, what did you used to like doing? Do you do anything like that right now to take care of yourself? And if you kind of realize that, the things that you used to enjoy doing, you're not going to do them the same way as when you're in high school. But if you kind of...
Hopefully those things are healthy, but some of us had some wild high school years. What did you do in high school? Like, don't do that.
True. Think of a healthy time when you felt like yourself and you felt like you enjoyed being you. And
enjoyed being you.
Do you do anything to fill that right now? And if the answer is no, I don't have time for it, but I'm good or whatever. But it just might be an indicator that you want to process with someone the balance that you have in your life. Yeah.
Yeah, that's good. Joanna, you have anything to add to that? That's the markers question of helping people.
I think they pretty much covered it. Yeah. I
Yeah.
really appreciated when you were talking about how, we have this tendency to compare what's going on with us to what's going on with other people. And, I think that kind of gets back to what we were talking about at the beginning of our time together of like, why is this so hard to talk about? Because we can tend to discount what's happening with us if we feel like it doesn't meet a certain criteria, or we can compare what's happening with someone else and think, I should be fine. My life isn't that hard. And I just think it's important to acknowledge that like all of us have a mental health, and our responsibility to ourselves, to our community, and to God is to take care of our mental health and be as good as we can be. And that doesn't look the same for everybody, but understanding what our baseline is, and maybe, when I am experiencing a lot of anxiety, my baseline is going to be different than when I'm not experiencing a lot of anxiety. And so just keeping an eye on where your baseline is. And if it's shifted, thinking about what can I do to get back to a place where I feel more comfortable. And there's a variety of things that you can do to take care of that.
Yeah. That's good. That's good. Thank you. Yeah. I try to practice yoga. So just being attuned to my body. And one of the things that helps me to do is to pay attention to what's happening in my body. So I can't always feel like not necessarily my heart rate, it's my breathing really that I can notice, like, okay, there's some anxiety that's building here. And we talk quite a bit at Sanctuary about your emotional health and trying to give language and permission for people to identify where they are emotionally. Just out of curiosity, is emotional health and mental health the same thing, or are they different, or are they talked about in different ways? So we've talked quite extensively at Sanctuary about your emotional health and spiritual health being in alignment with one another. Is mental health and emotional health the same thing, or are they different? No,
they're definitely intertwined. And our emotional health is a good indicator of what our mental health looks like.
Okay.
But of course, mental health is a little bit more robust. We're going to be, thinking through, when we're thinking about mental health, we're going to be thinking through how well our concentration functions, what forms of meaning we're attributing to our environment, what our inner dialogue, our inner narrative sounds like, those beliefs, those automatic thoughts. So that's also in the realm of mental health and our emotional health in terms of how we react within our relationships emotionally. That feels a bit separate, but you can see how it could also be involved in describing what our mental health looks like. So I would say they're intertwined rather than the same thing.
That's good. Michelle, you had unmuted right around the same time as Micah did. Yeah.
Yeah, I think I agree with her. And I would even go a step further and just say that all health is intertwined. So our physical health, emotional health, spiritual health, mental health. I think when we think of struggling mentally, I have to talk to someone, talk to a counselor, do something like really specific, take an assessment. There are some days when I'm more of a sleep doctor as a counselor, and we're just trying to figure out how can we get you a good night's sleep. And that might be seeing your primary care doctor or adjusting some things in your life. And when you sleep better, you can immediately feel that difference in your health. Yeah, so they're all intertwined.
That's good.
And that interconnectedness, I think, feels really powerful for me in the context of talking about mental health in church, because we are used to thinking about our spiritual health in church. And I think we're pretty comfortable thinking about our physical health. But when we think about ourselves as whole beings, and that God interacts with us as whole persons, including our body, our mind, our spirit, all of that. And so I think that's kind of powerful lens to look at mental health in the context of church as well.
That's good. That's really good. Awesome answer. So I can hear somebody saying, all right, so I'm gonna get started here. What resources are there available? And do they have to be specifically Christian? Do I have to get a Christian counselor? Do I have to go to a Christian psychologist? Because I can trust them, but I can't trust the other people who, the organization doesn't say, Crossroads, and it has a cross logo on the outside, of the building or something like that. So what action steps, resources? I asked you a bunch of questions there. Let me ask the first question. Does it have to be Christian? I know you are all Christian, but the organizations you work for aren't necessarily uniquely Christian. Some of them. How do you respond to somebody who says, "Well, I want a counselor, but do they have to be Christian, or can they not be Christian?" How do you help somebody make that decision?
I can start, I guess.
It was not in the script.
I think that I would answer the question is no, they don't have to be a Christian necessarily. But I
Okay.
also think you need to take stock for yourself of what's important for you. So if it's really important for you to go into your counseling and be able to talk about your spiritual journey, your counselor will be able to talk about that regardless of their own faith. And they have lots of training that will allow them to do that. But if it's important to you that they understand where you're coming from spiritually, you may want that. It's okay to want that out of a counselor, but you can also expect that your counselor is trained in how to care well for you, regardless of whether your backgrounds are aligned or your worldview is aligned. But it's always a good idea to research the counselor that you're going to go see and find out, what is their practice like, and what have other people experienced, because different things are important to different people. And it's okay to try a counselor and have a first interaction that doesn't feel particularly comfortable. That doesn't mean that you shouldn't be in counseling, and it doesn't mean that you have to stay in counseling with that person and just work through it until it feels better. It's okay to, after a first meeting, say, you know what, that didn't really work for me, I'm going to try somebody else. Your counselor's feelings aren't going to be hurt by that. They're used to handling all of those dynamics, and the most important thing is that you feel comfortable and can share with them, and that the interaction is good for you.
Yeah. I'm just listening and playing through these conversations. Somebody saying, well, if I go to a Christian, I know that they're going to give me Bible, and they're not going to recommend treatment, that looks like taking some kind of medication. And anybody who recommends medication, they must not be a Christian, and their faith must not be in God for me to receive my healing. Ooh-wee. That is not the case or the opinion here, I believe. Michelle, you just unmuted. What do you think?
Yeah, I think that's really powerful. And I think we can just think of it as wraparound services. So really thinking about how if I have something chemical or physical going on, again, we lost Micah.
Yeah, we'll see. Wait till she comes back, or she'll come back in here.
I guess if people are more familiar with physical things like diabetes, your doctor will give you medicine like insulin, and they'll also recommend diet and exercise. So I really think that it's not that you can only see a psychiatrist and you have to use medication. I think if that might be part of your treatment, and you also want to be talking spiritually with your friends, your mentors, about how this is affecting you in your relationship with God. And then vice versa. You don't want to be only just talking about your feelings when what you really need is medication. So just wraparound services, Christian,
I like that language.
non-Christian, they're all important.
Wraparound services. It's not like one service is going to provide everything that you need to get through this season or what you're experiencing right now. Welcome back, Micah. So
good to be back.
Good to be back. So my final question, I think, is for this conversation: what are the tools and resources that you would like to mention here, let people know that are available? We're in Columbus, Ohio, so a lot of the things that may come to mind are right here in the city of Columbus. Micah, would you like to go first on that?
Sure. So I would recommend if you are employed right now, and I do just want to acknowledge the fact that there are a lot of people who have lost their jobs during this time, and that is extremely difficult. And so for those who are still employed right now, if your human resources department hasn't already reached out to you about employment assistance programming, and they usually provide mental health services, legal services. Your EAP program is definitely something you would want to ask about from your human resources team. I would also say if you have health insurance right now, giving that phone number on the back of your health insurance card a call to find out what mental health professionals are in your mental health insurance network is a good idea as well, just in case you do want kind of an emotional mental health tune up, so to speak. Like we kind of said earlier, there's a spectrum of mental health capacity that we have. And if you're someone who's just like, yeah, I would love to be able to sit with a counselor, a mental health professional to work through some of the stress that I'm feeling, then by all means, call up your human resources department or your health insurance to find what those resources are for you.
That's good.
Another thing that's great about EAP is that oftentimes other members of your family are included in the EAP program. So if only one of the adults in your family is working right now, for example, the other adult may be able to also receive counseling services through EAP as well as your children.
Wow.
So it's definitely worth finding out what's available. And I would say even advocating for what you want. We've found in our job that we were able to actually ask if they would add some additional sessions to our EAP program because of the pandemic, and they did that. So they lengthened the number of sessions that you could receive. And they also have added counselors that specifically were requested. For example, our EAP program didn't have very many Black male counselors, and a few members of our agency asked if there could be some additional counselors added, and they were able to do that. So it's a good idea to just know what is available and then be willing to go ahead and ask and see what you can get, because there's a lot available. Another thing I would suggest is just to keep an eye on your own regulation. We've been talking a lot about those signs you might be experiencing chronic stress. And I like to think of it as having like a regulation toolbox. So what are the things that help you when you are experiencing stress? Some of us, it might be doing yoga like Pastor Rich. Some of us might need to go for a run. It might be particular music that you like. It might be just some breathing exercises. It's going to be different for all of us, but knowing what those things are and then intentionally putting them into your day so that you don't go a long time without doing them, that can help with some of those when it's not gotten to that acute level, but staying more regulated and present throughout your day. Another strategy that I heard recently that I thought was really nice was for those people that you live at home with. You know, it can be hard when you're both sort of not doing very well to always be asking each other, so how are you today? And then be like, it's just another hard day. Like that can in itself be a challenging conversation. So it might be worth putting in place just sort of like a little check-in system where it's like, all right, every day I'm going to ask you how your energy is, and you can tell me on a scale from 1 to 10. Or every day I'm going to ask you, how sad are you today? And you can tell me on a scale from 1 to 10. And we don't have to problem solve that in the moment. It's just a check-in. So you know that I'm here and I've heard you. And that I think can be a nice way to kind of like take some of the like, oh, we're having this hard conversation again, out of it when we're both sort of not functioning in our best state.
That's helpful. Yeah, that's good. Michelle, you have any suggestions?
If we're also thinking about connecting to some formal resources, one place that people sometimes start is NAMI. It's National Alliance on Mental Illness. They would be able to direct to there's many great agencies in the Columbus area. And NAMI itself also has like a free family support group if you're supporting a family member who is experiencing mental challenges. And I know they have some pro bono counseling as well. So that'd be one place that I would start.
Yeah. Well, I know there's quite a few places around Columbus, Ohio. So if you're watching this today and or at any time that you're viewing this, there's some places we do want to mention, and we're going to try to include this in some linked forms right here on Facebook and YouTube, the two places where we are going to be showing this for this time. So there's Sun Behavioral Health. That's a place right here in Columbus, Ohio. The number is 614-953-5219. There's NetCare, 614-276-2273. And then Nationwide Children's Crisis Hotline, 614-722-1800. And Buckeye Ranch is also another place here in Columbus, Ohio, 614-384-7798. We're going to put those in our chats and make sure that they are available for us. So there's some help that people can get personally. Are those places as well that family members can go to get their support? Or there's some other things that you might mention out there? Actually, what comes to mind before I go there as we wrap up, I was talking with a friend and he said that we were talking about mental health, and he's a fellow clergy, and he dropped this thought in my mind that we might do a good job, we being the church, we might do a good job helping somebody with suffering. And suffering seems to be language scripturally that's used to identify a moment or a period of time that passes. But then there's the other way of describing some things we experience called afflictions. And afflictions are chronic. Afflictions are long. The woman who was afflicted with an issue of blood, it was more than a decade, she's dealing with that issue. And so afflictions seem to go longer than just suffering is a way in which he was describing it. There are folks who are afflicted, and their suffering has gone on more than weeks or months and years. Our prayers are certainly for them and with them, and maybe God would, through this time, we even help our congregation and others who watch it, how to come alongside people who are dealing more on the affliction with those things. Any final thoughts or prayers that you want to offer?
I just think, thinking about how Jesus responded to folks who were dealing with affliction. So the woman with the issue of blood, thinking about lepers, folks who were cast out of society. And Jesus always went towards those people when he interacted with them. And so we might not be seeing people miraculously healed in the same way. Maybe we will, I don't know. But we know that Jesus went towards those people and didn't ostracize them and keep them out of his presence. And so, as the church, as much as we can go towards folks who have longer term things and, not isolating them by making them feel like, oh, that's too complicated or that's too hard or we don't have space, or if it doesn't get better right away, we feel uncomfortable, that there's space in our community and in the love of God for those folks, I think is really important for us to make that message clear.
Micah?
I would just love to remind the folks watching that you are just so loved. Like, the essence of God is love. He literally cannot not love you. Like, there's no change in your mental and emotional functioning that can make him love you less. There's no argument that you've had with your spouse, your sister, your friend. Nothing you can do can make him love you any less. And so I would just encourage you to hold tight to that thought. If you are in relationships where you don't get reminded intentionally about your belovedness, I just wanted to remind you of that here. And I think one of the reasons that we wanted to do this Zoom is to just embody the connectedness that we believe all people are deserving of. We wanted to connect with you through this Zoom and present this information in a relational, conversational way, because that's how we function best. Like, humans need to feel that connection and that belovedness. And so just wanted to remind our listeners and watchers about their state of just being eternally loved. It will not change.
That's good.
We want to walk together through all these things like any other thing that we talk about in church. None of us individually are the church, and so we all have experiences with God and insight, and we can lift each other's burdens. So I know that there's 4 people on this phone call that are interested in talking to different members, and I would say you'd be surprised. I'll be talking to someone that I met and realize that we have been through similar things, and I never would have guessed that. So just walking through it with each other and being willing to talk.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you to you all for joining me on this table talk. I'm so glad that it worked out. And for those who are viewing, thank you for watching. Our hope is that there was something said here that was inviting for you to continue to learn more, listen closely. And again, for those who are going through some difficult times right now with your mental health, not only are prayers free, but we want to do what we can to help you get connected to those resources. So feel free to put it in the chat or go to our website and fill out a digital connection card, or just email me directly at rich.johnson@sanctuarycolumbus.com so that we can help you and come alongside you for the next step in seeing Jesus and you receiving your belovedness. I love the way you said that, Micah. That was so good. Well, thank you all. My blessings and my love is with you. Take care of yourself. I'll see you soon in Jesus' name. All right.